All right, and it looks like we are live. So I am, hopefully a couple more people will join us because it does look like it's just you and me right now. We're just hanging out with each other. But I guess let's take some time and introduce ourselves and maybe just share a little bit about our OCD stories, if you would like.
Yeah, for sure. So my name's Anna. I am an OCD and mental health advocate on Instagram, and that's how I met Mollie. I have suffered with OCD for almost my entire life. I recently got support through ERP, and I did an intensive outpatient program through like midway through COVID, and I just graduated that. But yeah, I spent a lot of my time just advocating and being a voice for others with OCD because it's a really hard disorder to live with.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. And I am Mollie, and I also have OCD, of course, and I love to talk about it. I could talk about it all day, every day. And always, the thing with OCD is there's always something to talk about because it just latches on to anything and everything. So it is, there's always new content to share with others, different things that work, that don't work. So I am just so glad to be here with Anna, and I know she is where you are in Canada, and I am in America. I'm in Virginia, so it's always good to be able to connect with people from all over the world because OCD does not discriminate. So, and I do see some people are here and a question.
Perfect.
So let's see. So Rich asked, in your experience, are there any positive side effects to OCD? That's a good question. You want to take that one first?
Yeah. I mean, like, I feel like meeting the OCD community has been a huge win and a huge plus for me. Just knowing that there's other people out there that struggle with really similar things to me, and knowing that there's others that they just get it. Like, you can try all you want to explain it to individuals who don't have OCD, and they might kind of understand it or get like a generalized version of it. But if you don't live with it, it's really hard to get. So I feel like meeting everyone out there with OCD. I don't like that everyone has it, but knowing that there's a group out there is
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. There's the community, and there's, I think, just like that sense of solidarity when you explain. I know we've talked about this before, but like when you explain what you're going through and someone else is like, yeah, me too. And it's like, whoa, I didn't know there were other people that really, like you said, get it. And I agree. And unfortunately, OCD is not fun, and it's not, I don't, I can't think of any positives of like OCD specifically, but more of just being able to share and talk about it and meet other people and advocate and know that we are helping other people is just helps me sleep better at night, knowing that, I feel less alone, other people feel less alone.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. All right. So Tatiana asked about disassociation with due to a lot of anxiety from OCD. That is not something I personally have experience with. What about you, Anna?
Yeah, I experienced disassociation a lot. And I feel like that's also just like a way, I'm not a therapist or anything, but I personally find that that's a way for myself to just try to like kind of decompress sometimes. Like sometimes I'm just so overwhelmed with what's happening that the only way that my brain knows how to process anything is to just like shut down. And I'm like, I'm gone, my mind's gone, and whatever is in front of me, like I'm not able to focus on. So yeah, I think it's not that anything's normal, but I think it's a very like typical thing to experience too. Yeah.
And I want to know that because this is not, like I said, not something I have a lot of experience with, is that it's like when you're when you like check out, like when you're just like not where you are. So is that okay?
Yeah, it's almost like, if I were to explain it, like for me personally, it's almost as if I have just like zoned out to the extreme. Like I'm gone. Like it's not me that's there. And so sometimes it can help, and sometimes I just feel like it just makes things spin more. But I find for me it's just like a way for my body to be like, whoa. Like,
And it reminds me of like somebody who's experiencing like really intense trauma. Is that
totally.
which OCD in itself is a form of trauma, and I know it often comes with other types of trauma as well. So is that kind of from that, I'm guessing?
Yeah, I feel like it totally could be from that. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, oh, oops. Well, I love that question. So Darla asked, does OCD mess with your happiness? Seems like the happy events happen, my OCD kicks in. Yeah. Oh yeah. OCD messes with everything. And I know from my own experience, getting married and moving in with somebody and, getting a pet, like Anna and I were just talking about our dogs and having that experience. OCD wants to latch on to everything that we value. So for it to kind of take over those happy events is so common and is so normal with OCD. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And I mean, it's hard too, because even though like there can be a really exciting thing happening, a really big event, and it's not like we can just tell OCD like, hey, this is really important, or I'm really excited for it. Like, don't show up tonight. Like, we have no control over what kind of thoughts are going to enter our brain. And so it's really hard too when you're at it's a really exciting moment, or you are out doing something that you really enjoy doing and OCD is still there. So it's really hard.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say some advice that I would have is to still do the things. And I know that that's like so much easier said than done. But OCD wants to keep us kind of in our own box and not out and exploring and doing these fun things. So to be able to say, I'm still going to, and still, it's okay to be anxious. It's okay to be scared, and still do the things, I think is huge. So that's what I would say for that.
And I think also like remembering that no matter what you do, you'll still have intrusive thoughts. You'll like OCD will still be there. So just like you said, Molly, like it's a matter of, am I going to let OCD take over tonight, or am I just going to go do this anyways, knowing that OCD might be here and might present itself at some point?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think just kind of to piggyback off of that, which is piggyback off of me, that I feel like it's easier to regret the things that we don't do.
Yes.
So if you stay home and don't do the fun things and kind of let your OCD win in that way, I think that's sad, and that you'll look back on that and feel really sad. Whereas if you go out and you are anxious, but you're still doing the things, it's a lot harder to regret that.
Yeah. And you still did it. Like that's huge for going out, right? So
yeah, absolutely. So do you want to take that one?
Yeah. So I'm assuming that HOCD, I'm assuming you mean like, I'm not sure if you mean like harm OCD, or I'm assuming it's harm OCD. So has it changed you sexually?
So I think they mean homosexual OCD.
Yeah. I was trying to figure out if it was that or,
let me see.
Yeah, or harm, but
yeah.
Okay. Yeah, but I mean, I feel like for sure, I mean, OCD in general, for me personally, I feel like it can definitely affect anything, right? And so, especially when you have those thoughts, it makes it a lot harder to want to engage in anything or do anything, right? Like it's almost like this big barrier that's there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess Abby, if you can provide a little bit more. Sorry, let's see. I don't know. I think she might mean like sexual orientation OCD, which is different from harm OCD, but at the end of the day, it is still OCD, and it does not change who you are, if that makes sense. And I don't want to provide reassurance, but who you are is who you are. Your OCD, whatever content it is, whatever theme it latches onto, it doesn't change who you are at the end of the day. And I know that's very vague, but yeah, I mean, like you said, it can impact your sex life if that is kind of the question. So I would love a little bit of follow up, Abby.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah. Oh, that is a wonderful question. Go ahead.
Yeah. Hi. Hello. Okay. So after counseling, how can I be my own therapist? I think that's a really great way of phrasing it too, instead of just, okay, now I'm done therapy, what can I do for myself? Like being your own therapist. So I'm not sure like about you, Molly, but when I finished therapy and I finished my program, I had like a support plan basically that was done up with me. And so I have that and I frequently refer back to it. But I always just like, even like making a few points that you're like, I really want to work hard on continuing like to not seek reassurance or do the specific compulsion, and just like kind of like checking in with yourself and being like, okay, I have this immense urge to do this right now, but I've told myself that we're not going to do it, or we're going to do this less, or we're going to delay it, and just like holding yourself accountable. And that might be like by printing off some of the things that you learned in therapy and putting it on your fridge, or talking with people that you live with or that you have relationships with, just to be like, hey, these are some things that I'm really working on. Maybe you can like help to hold me accountable, or if you're noticing something, we can like check in. Yeah. And just kind of like setting yourself up for success, really.
Yeah. I think it's good to have, like you're saying, to have those thoughts while you're still in therapy, and to bring them up with your therapist, because I know at OCD, we kind of joke that we don't want to see you again. That's really the goal, is to get you so that you can be your own therapist and that you can apply those skills that you're learning. But yeah, I think it's a great idea to bring that up with your therapist, to ask them, what tools can I have for afterwards, so that, because you don't want to necessarily be in therapy forever. You want to be able to use these things moving forward. So, yeah.
And also knowing that, like, if there does come a point after you're done counseling or you're done your therapy and you're like, this is really hard, I just can't do it anymore, like, contact your therapist and try to get back into it. Because then you're just helping yourself even more.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. Okay, so Leo, so this is a double question asked. How do I stop thinking about my past actions or thoughts? Sometimes if I overthink my thoughts, I have anxiety and I start to think that I'm my biggest fear. Is that a common OCD symptom?
Yeah, I feel like that's super common, especially that rumination of like the past things that like you've either done in the past or you've thought about or you've said. I feel like that's a really common symptom in OCD.
Absolutely. And I also want to reiterate that Anna and I are I don't want to speak for you, but what I consider in recovery. But that does not mean that we are cured. There is no
free of OCD.
Right. It is still present. And this is something that I deal with pretty regularly, is kind of ruminating on past events, whether they actually happened or not. My brain kind of, latches onto them, tries to make me think, did I say the wrong thing? Did I, in terms of friendships, I a lot of times I will think like, could I have done something different to still be friends with this person or still have this person in my life? And, the answer always is maybe not, we can't change the past. So yeah, it is definitely something that we experience, I think.
Yeah. And I definitely agree with, like, once you start overthinking, your anxiety, it just creeps up, right? Because you're giving fuel to the monster. That's exactly what it wants.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's not a question, but I just love that. Give the OCD the middle finger by doing what we enjoy. I mean, that's exactly it. Yeah, you want to still be the person that you strive to be, and to do the things that you enjoy doing, even with OCD sometimes is challenging, but it is doable.
Yeah.
Okay, so then Abby did say, does it change my sexuality? So I guess, yeah, so she was asking like sexual orientation OCD.
Yes. I mean, just like, not to give reassurance, like maybe it will, maybe it won't, but I think it's also important though to just kind of like look at, just because looking at the content of your thoughts doesn't mean that you are those thoughts. OCD likes to just take us along on a wild ride, and so this is what it's taking you on right now.
Yeah, and that's again, just the content is not relevant, as hard as that is when it's something as serious. It just doesn't. I feel like it's such a simple answer, but it really is that it doesn't matter. What your OCD is latching onto is not important, whether it's your sexuality, your relationship, your children, your health, whatever it is all OCD. So
yeah,
I hope that helps. Is ERP the best? It is the gold standard for a reason. It is, yeah, and I guess do you want to give a little bit, because I really butchered it last time when I tried to explain it in simple terms. Do you want to just give like a brief overview of what ERP is?
Yeah, so ERP is exposure and response prevention. So the first portion of it, you'll meet with like your therapist, and you kind of just chat about what's going on and like what you're thinking about, what your obsessions are. And then you just kind of take a look at like some of the fears that you have and things that really scare you. And you jump into the E part, which is exposures. And you are basically just you start, you and your therapist chat about where is like an appropriate level to start with on your hierarchy, and you expose yourself to your fears. And then the response prevention part is what you work with your therapist on to prevent yourself from engaging in compulsions, or maybe you are like delaying the amount that you're doing it, or you're reducing the amount of time you're spending on it. But it's all about exposing yourself to something that you really truly fear and cutting out the compulsion before, during, and after it.
Yep. Yeah, that's a perfect way of describing it. And it is the most beneficial, or I should say it's the most effective treatment for OCD. So I know a lot of times people will be in talk therapy and will say like, why is my OCD not getting better? Why am I still ruminating? Why am I still giving into these compulsions? And that's exactly why. In talk therapy, you're just talking about it and you're not actually getting you're trying to get to the bottom of maybe why you're having these anxieties or what happened in your past to bring this on. And that's really, yeah, right. And that's not going to get you anywhere. So yes, ERP is the best for treating OCD. And it is hard and it is an everyday battle. But it is, I think living with OCD in itself is an everyday battle. So with ERP, you're facing that and you're again, trying to do the things that you want to do, with those thoughts there.
Yeah. And ERP, it's really hard to start sometimes, and it's really hard to want to stick with it because it's just easier in some moments to give in to OCD, but starting it is huge. So
yeah. And I love this follow-up that we have to remember the life we're missing out on and not listen to the OCD bully. That is the best treatment in a sense. Yeah.
Yep.
I think I know a lot of times as well, people will say like, how do you keep motivation? How do you keep going when you want to give up or when things are really hard? And I think that's an important piece, is to think about what you're missing out on. Why you started therapy in the first place, why you are trying to conquer this OCD is because you weren't, present with your kids, or because you were avoiding certain places in your house, or whatever it is. So I think that's a really good point, Aurelio. Yeah. And then Mimi did ask, when did you realize you had OCD? Yeah, do you want to take that one first?
Yeah, so I started experiencing OCD when I can remember thoughts and engaging in compulsions from when I was 3 or 4. I didn't realize it was OCD until I was a little bit older. Mm-hmm. And then I wasn't formally diagnosed until I was a teenager, just because I had gone to the wrong therapists essentially. And they just thought that it was general anxiety and they could just treat me for it that way, which was very, very wrong at the time. Mm-hmm. But also when I was younger, OCD just really, it was looked at as just hand washing and cleaning, mm-hmm. and not so much mental compulsions. That wasn't really as common when I was younger. And so yeah, I wasn't diagnosed until I was older, and then started treatment just a couple of years ago for it.
Yeah. And I unfortunately have a very similar story. I definitely had compulsions as a kid, never realized what they were. I thought that was just the way everyone lived. And I think that is just so common when OCD, the way that OCD is portrayed in the media and it's often the butt of jokes, and it's, just this quirk that people wash their hands a lot, or people need to, tap the stove before they leave the house or whatever it is. And that's not, that's doing a disservice to so many people that really are struggling. And I definitely was one of them. And when I went away to college was when I kind of realized that other people were living so much more freely. They were just kind of going through their days and not constantly stuck in their head and not stressed and going through these compulsions. And that's when I reached out for help as well. I was in talk therapy for a couple of years. It helped somewhat in terms of just kind of getting out some of my feelings, but it didn't do anything for the OCD. I'm sorry, I'm trying to catch up on questions. And I as well just recently got into therapy in the past couple of years and learned about OCD. And I think that's so important. Such an important part of OCD treatment is really just learning about it, about how it impacts you. And I know I speak for a lot of people when I say that I constantly am like realizing that the certain things I did in my childhood were OCD, and I had no idea until recently.
Yeah, and I think we've had this conversation before too, that there's a lot of things that I did when I was a child that people would just label as like, oh, that's just like a quirky thing that Anna does, or like these are just some like weird things that she does. But at the time, a lot of teachers and like adults in my life were just like, kids do weird things sometimes to cope with like different changes and challenges going on. So we kind of just chalked it up to that. But yeah, I've definitely like started like reflecting more on when I was younger, and I was like, there's a lot of things that I did that were for sure, it was for sure OCD, but in the moment people were just like, oh, she's fine, she's just she's just being her, she's just being silly. But yeah.
And I mean, I think that is so hard. As I'm not a parent, I know you're not a parent, and I know like as parents that has to be really difficult to see your child struggling, not know if it's quote unquote normal, or if it's something more serious.
Absolutely.
And during Hollow was asked, what do I do if I cannot remember or figure something out and it causes me to have anxiety? What am I supposed to do now? Or what am I supposed to do then? Or if I say, if I do this, I will be anxious.
You got to sit with that and that uncertainty. It's really hard, and it's really hard to not have a definitive like yes or no answer of did I really do this? Did I figure this out? But sitting with that uncertainty, it's really, really hard at first, but the more you do it and the more you kind of push back on OCD, the easier it becomes for you, because you know that you're strong enough to kind of sit with it and not give it the attention that it's wanting.
Yeah. I think that's a great example.
And also just like not fighting off the anxiety. Like you feel anxious. It's okay to feel anxious, right? So it's not the best feeling in the world, but
no, but it is survivable. It's not, anxiety has never, I don't want to say never because that's a different definitive, but anxiety is not the problem. It's how we respond to that anxiety that really is what holds us back.
Yeah, exactly.
Can you explain hierarchies? Yes. So hierarchies are I'm trying to think. Go ahead if you have a easy way to describe it.
So the hierarchy is like a pyramid basically that you'll do, or just like a rating that you'll do with your therapist when it comes to sitting down to start your treatment. So you take a look at, and it's like, it might be different for each therapist and for each person. It depends. But for me personally, like when I did my hierarchy, we looked at like things like, we looked at some scenarios that I kind of chatted about that I was really worried and anxious about. And I ranked them to like being the complete absolute worst life-ending situation to the ones that were like maybe bearable. And we just worked through each exposure that was on that list to go through my ERP.
Yeah. So it's basically, and I know some therapists will do like 1 to 100, some will do 1 to 10, just kind of depends on their preference, I guess. But yeah, it's basically ranking your things that make you anxious. So if you, for example, have contamination OCD and you have fears of getting sick, a 1, a 10 might be, contracting a deadly disease and giving it to your partner. Whereas a 1 might be walking past somebody who's coughing. Those are very generic, but, and you'll kind of just work your way up that ladder. Sometimes they call it the ladder, fear hierarchy. It all is, depends on what you want to call it. But yeah, it's basically just approaching those things that make you anxious and working your way up until you get to the thing that makes you really anxious. And by the time you're there, it's not as severe usually as if you go a little bit at a time.
Yeah, you definitely build up those skills and kind of know how to set yourself up to respond to those moments of anxiety. Yeah,
absolutely. I love all these questions. For contamination OCD, what if something is dirty? Should we still touch it? I start therapy in about a week.
That's awesome that you're starting therapy. Congratulations. Yeah. That's a huge step.
It is, yeah. And I think it's so important to recognize, like, you're already making progress. Like you're here, you're asking us really great questions, you're starting therapy, you're working on yourself. All of those things matter. And I know that things are about to get really, really tricky if you're in the process of starting therapy. but it is so important to, to recognize that progress already.
Mhm.
And in terms of, I'll let you answer that because I know you deal a little bit more with contamination OCD than I do.
Yeah, and I would definitely bring this up with your therapist. I think this is a great place to start with your therapist. And like we said earlier, we're not therapists, we're OCD specialists. We're just individuals that live with OCD. But like for me personally, sometimes when I get one of those fear thoughts in my brain and I know it's OCD and it's trying to trick me to avoid something or not do something, I just do the opposite, and I do it just to kind of stick it to OCD. So
yeah. And I'll share a personal example. It's not contamination related, but Anna and I were just talking about this before the live. So my shirt it's like asymmetrical in the sense that this little middle part is here and there's not one on the other side. And I have been purposely avoiding wearing this shirt for literally months. It has been sitting in my closet, even though I love it. And I thought, I'm doing this live tonight. I'm going to do the exact opposite of what my OCD is telling me to do. And I hate it. My eyes keep going to it. I keep looking at it, but I'm like, you know what? I'm doing it anyway, even though I'm anxious, even though all these thoughts are flooding into my mind of what are people going to think of me? Who do I think I am wearing this shirt? Whatever the thoughts are. And so Aurelio, to kind of relate it to what I'm going through, it's, I'm still doing the thing. I'm still exposing myself to the thing that makes me anxious and doing the exact opposite of what my OCD is telling me to do.
Yeah. And even sometimes, like, you don't always have to jump right into doing something, but even just kind of accepting that thought that like something over here is really dirty, and just be like, okay, this plate is really dirty. There's something on it. There could be germs, there could be a disease, there could be anything, but that plate's dirty and I'm just going to let it sit there. And I'm going to just be okay with the thought that this plate has something on it.
Yeah. I'm excited for you to start as well.
Yes.
Is there an OCD where you believe almost everyone is a predator? I've been dealing with this all my life towards people who are not bad people at all, but my mind convinces me they are. Yeah, I mean, I was tempted to stop the question when I started reading it. Is there an OCD where ... Yes, I mean, OCD can latch onto anything. It doesn't matter, what the fear is. It's OCD.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that can definitely be a thing that your OCD is going to latch onto.
Absolutely. Especially when you say like I don't think so, but my mind convinces me. I always find I always tell myself that that's a big like flag that it's OCD when I'm like, oh, I'm not sure, but my brain is sending me these warnings or it's saying these things, and I can usually clue in pretty quickly. Okay.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. So I guess the advice I would say is to, again, accept that might be the case. They might be bad people, or not. We don't know. We can't know. And to do what your OCD is, do the opposite of what your OCD is telling you. So still hang out with them. Still, be around them. Surround yourself with them.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. Do you have any tips on what to do when your OCD is flaring up and the thoughts are more sticky?
That's really hard. I find personally, like I recently went through a little bit of a lapse with my OCD, and it's really hard when you're doing really well and then all of a sudden out of nowhere, OCD is trying to consume you again. And I definitely I get it with those when your thoughts become more sticky. I feel like it's OCD just really trying to be like, okay, you kind of pushed me away before and I settled for a little while, but now I really want you to do these things. But I still I kind of just refer back to my treatment plan, and I take a look at what are 2 or 3 things that I can work on immediately. So maybe I'm going to start delaying some compulsions, or I'm going to reach out and book a really quick phone call with my therapist, or I'm going to reach out to one of my friends and say, hey, I'm really struggling right now. I can always give Mollie a text or a phone call. This is really crappy right now. I don't know what to do, and just kind of have others there to support you, and just kind of work slowly one by one at what you can do, because you've done it before. So it's kind of once you start, then you can get back into it.
Yeah. And I want to just add that I think sometimes when our OCD is kind of dormant for some time, and then it comes back, as hard as it is to recognize that when you're in it, I feel like that's progress, because it means,
100%.
you've been, I don't want to say good, because it's not necessarily, but you've been, doing a little bit better for so long, and then it comes back and it's like, wow, that shows you how far you've come, I think.
Totally.
Which, I mean, it's so hard when you're in it, but I think just like you said, just admitting that you are struggling is already a step.
Yeah, and it's okay to struggle. It's okay for OCD to come back and to have either like a lapse or a relapse, right? And just knowing that like that's OCD. Like in your lifetime, you can maintain recovery, but that doesn't mean that it's gone forever and that the thoughts are gone and you're living a life without OCD. Like we never really know. So just even like keeping that in the back of your mind that you're doing the best you can right now. And sometimes you just need to reach out for that extra help and support.
Yeah. And I think it's important to remember your values as well, and what you want to do in your life, or even just day to day, what you want to do today. If you didn't have OCD, what would you be doing? And go do that. And, even if the OCD is there, and even if it's stickier than normal, just keep, kind of doing the things that you want to do.
I really love that perspective.
Yeah.
That's a really great thing to remind yourself.
Yeah. And it's so we say these things like they're easy, but they're not. This is not something you just can do tomorrow. It's, it takes time, it takes practice, but it is worth it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. What do you do if your OCD changes theme?
Just keep doing what you're doing before. You just keep challenging OCD. Like your theme, you're never guaranteed to have the exact same theme forever, right? Like OCD really bounces around to what you value and care about the most in that moment. So yeah.
Yeah. And I think accepting that might be the case. I know it's so hard when it comes up and it latches onto something completely different. But again, the theme is not the important part. It's the response to those thoughts. It's the way that we handle them that really shows our progress. So just being aware that might happen. We oftentimes will call it kind of like a whack-a-mole effect, that as soon as you get one area or one theme kind of under control and manageable, it comes up with something new. And that's the name of the game in OCD. Is it's creative. It's going to find what it can to.
Creative.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so creative.
Yes. So I love all of these questions. So they've asked about panic attacks. Is fearing panic attack part of OCD? I hate the pain of panic attack. So speaking from my own experience, I have only had a few panic attacks. And I personally find that the day or two after a panic attack is almost worse than the panic attack itself, because there's that fear of, what if this happens again? And that is, to me, is just the scariest thing, because you're so aware of what it was like, and it's so painful and it's so awful. And you think that it's going to happen again any minute. So yeah, I mean, and again, OCD can latch onto the fear of anything. So yeah, I'm there with you, and I see you nodding your head as well.
And yeah, and panic attacks are really hard, and they're really uncomfortable, and they're really scary. And so like anyone who experiences panic attacks, I give them my heart, because it's hard, and it's not like you can always prevent them or know exactly when it's happening. It can just in the blink of an eye hit you. So yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. I wish we had better advice, or even just, again, the solidarity of knowing that we've been there and we know what it's like. But it's scary, it's hard, and I have had them, and it's awful.
It really is. Yeah.
Yeah. Is it curable? No, unfortunately. So OCD is chronic, which means that it is not going anywhere, but it is manageable. It is livable. It is something that we can work on every day.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think once you start like a therapy program, once you start ERP, I think the more you get into it, the easier it is to kind of realize and accept that, hey, I might not be able to live a life without OCD, but I know how to live with OCD now. I think that was a really big changing point for me in my therapy, once I kind of accepted that it's not going anywhere, but that's okay because I know I can live with it.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, and I think as well when you start therapy, well, so often people have been struggling for years,
Yes.
and I think it's really important to remember that you've made it this far with OCD. You're resilient, you're strong, you're brave, you're here, and anything that you're learning from now on is going to be, applicable to that OCD. And it's like you said, you're living with OCD. Now you can live with OCD and have these tools and these strategies to combat it.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's a great question, though.
Yeah.
Has OCD ever changed your perception of yourself? Sometimes I feel like I don't know who I am anymore, especially with false memories. Yeah.
Totally. Yeah, I feel like there's a lot of times too where I just kind of get in to this loop of just OCDs telling me that like I'm not who I really am. I'm something
Mhm.
else. I'm a horrible person. I've done something bad. I'm a disgrace. Like there's a lot of things that OCD can really, once it's like in your mind and you fester on it for a little while, you can definitely start thinking differently. And yeah, and it's really hard too with false memories, right? Because you're
Mhm.
not sure. You really want to confirm whether you've done something or said something or like doing something wrong, but we never know. And it's
Mhm.
hard, but yeah, definitely it can change your perception of yourself, but just remembering like who you are as a
Mhm.
person and what you value. And yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's important to remember that OCD doesn't care about logic. So
Mm-mm.
I know a lot of times, someone's rumination is trying to kind of use logic to get your way. I'm
Yes.
trying to think of how to word this, to kind of prove to yourself that this thing happened or that you are this person. And OCD does not abide by logic in that way. So, you're never going to out logic OCD. And I know that's not a word, but because it doesn't make sense. So I think that's something important to keep in mind with false memories, especially, is that no matter how much you try to prove to yourself that these things didn't happen or that you didn't do these certain actions, we never know, and we're never going to be able to prove that.
Yeah. Yeah. And just remembering like who you are,
Mhm.
as a person, what you value, things you love. Like OCD likes to make up so many different storylines of who who OCD thinks we are, or things that OCD
Mhm.
thinks wants to make us think that we've done.
Yeah, yeah. I think I've heard people compare OCD to like a bully from like childhood, and I think that's such a good description because it wants you to believe that you are this person. It wants you to think that you've done these things, and yeah, like you're saying, who you are. Staying true to yourself is how we kind of get through it.
Yeah. An analogy that I learned the other day that I was like, this is such a great way to look at it is that you need to be like the driver of your own bus. So on the bus, in each seat, you can have all of these different parts of OCD that are kind of screaming at you like kids scream on buses, but you're the driver, you're in control, and you're the one who's able to make decisions. And yeah, maybe sometimes someone might throw something at you and it hits you and kind of knocks you out of your lane for a bit, but you can always try to come back and
Yeah,
steer where you want to go. So
I
I
love
heard that. I was
that.
like, yes.
Yeah, that's really good. Yeah, I'm like
Yeah.
picturing because I love analogies where you can like physically picture
Yes.
like what you're describing. Yeah, that's really good.
Yeah.
Has it ever made you do things in your own personal bubble that's out of character for you?
Totally. Yeah. Like we look at OCD and it's ego dystonic, right? So it's making
Mhm.
you think and do things that are against your values and against things that you believe in, right? So
Mhm.
it can, even for like compulsions, it can push you to do things that people, even yourself, like don't typically think of you as, but OCD's in your ear telling you that you have to do it.
Yeah, yeah. Another analogy that I just because
Yeah.
we're full of analogies tonight, that I've heard of that I really like as well is I picture it as like a cartoon, but it's like the angel on one shoulder and the
Oh
devil
yeah.
on the other shoulder.
Yeah.
So that might be very triggering for people with like more religious scrupulosity, but I'm going to go there anyway. I know like the devil is the one that you want to ignore, and the devil is the OCD in this sense, not like the like devil, but because the angel is you, and you are the one, like you said, driving the bus. You're the one in control. You can listen to the devil and give into the compulsions, or you can kind of push it off your shoulder and keep going. So that's really cheesy, but
I love it. Whenever people say that, like the angel and the devil on the shoulder,
Mhm.
it reminds me of Lizzie McGuire and how she had like the cartoon version of her always in the show and was like on her shoulder. That's all I can ever think of.
That's awesome. Yeah. I discovered that if I force myself to be physically active, that I thought that said physically attractive at first. That my OCD grows weak. Do you guys have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, exercise is a great tool to use to support your mental health. Like it won't get rid of it, it won't cure you, but it's definitely a great tool to add.
Mm-hmm.
And especially like I feel like once you're doing something that makes you feel good and you kind of get that like the feel good after it as well, it just aids in your
Absolutely.
recovery.
Yeah. And I think that's a really important piece that you said, that it's not a cure. It's not, because I know a lot of times with like toxic positivity, people are like, oh, just exercise and you'll not
Drink
be
water.
that, right? And like, yeah, it can help. Like it's not, it always can be a good addition to therapy, support, etc. But it's not the cure. But yeah, being physically active can definitely help, because it also just takes your mind off of your mind. It kind of takes you out of yourself, and focus on doing something, and that's kind of always good with OCD, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and then so JD asked about medication. So he said, his therapist referred him to a psychiatrist. Start with medication. It's locked on here. I don't know anything about OCD. Medication doesn't work. So kind of like we were just saying in a similar way, that medication can be a really good addition to therapy. We are not trained clinicians, so do not take this as advice, in that sense, but medication can work. Antidepressants are typically what is prescribed for treating OCD in addition to therapy. So ERP is really what's going to be the most beneficial, and medication can be a supplement, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's also important to look at that. Just because your psychiatrist prescribes maybe like one medication, it doesn't mean that that's the one you have to stick with for the rest of your life. Or maybe you get medication and you're like, you know what, this isn't working for me, right? Like it's definitely, I think it's really important to remember that you can still have the control over the decisions when it comes to your medication too, which I know I struggled with for a really long time when I first started. And but I was like, this is the rest of my life. And my doctor was like, actually, say no. And I was like,
well, I think that's really important too, that you have to be your own advocate, that, your psychiatrist might have a degree, but you. And if the side effects are not something you are willing to put up with, or, to kind of take over your life, you get to make that decision. Of course, consult them if you're choosing to stop medication, but, that's a great point.
Yeah. And there's nothing wrong with taking medication, and there's nothing wrong with not taking it. Yes. Both are, sometimes you need it and sometimes you don't, which both are totally valid.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the stigma around, I just love this comment about Lizzie McGuire. The stigma around medication is it's heartbreaking, because if somebody was struggling with, pain, physical pain, they would take a medication to stop that, and no one would bat an eye at that it would just be kind of, expected that you want to get rid of that. And I think it's the same with mental health, is that if you need something that helps you and it supports you and it makes you able to live better, do it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And then they asked, does an OCD have psychiatrists or resources to find one? So to give a little bit of background, I do work for an OCD. I am a peer advisor there. So I help support members as they go through their therapy sessions. I help answer questions about the program, since I went through the program. So some of the therapists that we have are psychiatrists. They are not able, as of now, to prescribe medication. That is not something that they can do, but they can definitely refer you to a psychiatrist who can. They can work with if you are seeing a current psychiatrist. When I went through the program, I was seeing a psychiatrist, and my therapist at an OCD, talked with my psychiatrist, was on the same page. So that is definitely something that can help, and that can happen. And again, they can refer you out if a psychiatrist is needed and they are not able to provide that. So I hope that answers the question.
I actually have a question about psychiatrists, just because I feel like there's such a difference living in like Canada versus the US. So in Canada, I feel like it's pretty typical, where I am anyways, when it comes like medications and stuff. I typically just see like a family doctor around getting like medications, even just for like my mental health meds. So is it common then in the US that like you typically see like psychiatrists for that stuff?
That's interesting. Yeah, and your family doctor definitely can prescribe medication. I, again, just speaking from my experience, I did see a psychiatrist who helped me kind of manage my medication choices. But yeah, I mean, you definitely can go to your family doctor. I don't know like percentage wise, which is more common. But I do know, again, in America, there's psychiatrists can prescribe medication. Psychologists cannot, and social workers, counselors. Yeah. But that's so interesting because I know it's so different in everywhere.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I'm always just like, oh, yeah, people in America can like see a psychiatrist for so many other things. And yeah.
And I, again, just speaking from what I went through, I thought that a psychiatrist was going to like sit down and talk with me. And that was not the experience that I had. They really just were like, tell me your symptoms. Let's figure out how to fix this kind of. It was not, like it was not the empathetic, caring.
See on TV.
Right. Yes. And so like, I'm so glad that I found an ERP therapist who was that caring voice and able to help me. Psychiatrists help in just a different way, I guess.
Awesome. Yeah.
It sounds like it's raining all of a sudden. What do you do when you feel a new obsession coming? I try to do ERP for it, but sometimes spiral if the obsession is too scary.
I think you're taking a great first step at trying to do ERP. And I think it's important to remember that like, it's not the best to hear, but sometimes you can try and it doesn't work, right? Like sometimes you can try really hard to put off a compulsion or to accept a thought or to just like avoid doing a compulsion. But sometimes OCD just wins in the end, right? And I think it's okay that happens. Like just give yourself some grace and know that you can always try again next time. But if you're feeling that they're becoming like, those obsessions are becoming really scary or they're really overwhelming and consuming, I would connect back with your therapist again and just say that, hey, this is a new thing that's come up and I feel like the tools that I have just aren't working. What can we do about this? What can we work on?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, recovery is not in my personal experience, at least, recovery is not necessarily a destination. It's more of, it's kind of just a
really, really long road trip.
Yes. Yeah.
Never end up anywhere.
Yes. Yeah. And I know that when I start to feel like really overwhelmed, I know I've texted you before and I've been like, I forget everything that I've learned at therapy. Like when you get into those spirals, it's hard to apply the things that you know are going to work because there's always what if this time it's different, or, this time it's not really OCD, or whatever those thoughts are. So again, have some compassion for yourself. Use the things that you do know as much as you can, and reach out if you're not able to kind of get through it independently.
Yeah, and it's always fine to reach out if you need more support, because you're not expected to just finish ERP once and then you're like, hey, see you later. You're on your own for the rest of your life. You got to figure this out, and you have these strategies. But sometimes you get older, situations change. Obsessions just become too much. You feel like you need a little bit of like a refresher, and going back to therapy is always a really great option and resource.
Yeah, absolutely. And we had a training today at work, and we were talking about this idea that if you are learning how to ski, you're never going to just learn how to ski and be done and be this like world-class skier and never have any problems. You're going to need to kind of fill yourself in, fill in the gaps when you learn new things and practice. It's not something you can just know how to do and be done. And ERP is kind of like that. If you are, you're not going to just wake up tomorrow and be like, I'm done with therapy, I'm good, see you later. It's something you still need to work on, something that you still need to work at and practice. And to just compare it back to skiing, new hills are going to keep coming up and new things that you need to ski around. I clearly don't know anything about skiing. But yeah, and I think that's, again, just knowing that is a possibility is helpful. And it's, yeah.
Absolutely.
And I do want to just to kind of give a little bit of props to NoCD. We do have a lot of support groups, and I know that we are working to get them more specialized. So I know right now we have ones for parents, we have ones for certain themes. I know we have a sexually intrusive thoughts, OCD support group, different types of themes, people that are new to ERP, people that are experienced with ERP. And I would definitely, they're free. They're through the NoCD app. They are run by a trained professional, a clinician from NoCD. So I would say if that is a possibility, it is a free resource we have that is just helpful. It is just there to help support people who, have that background and are trying to better themselves. So I'd say that's always an option as well, the app, just to reach out to other people to know that we're not alone in what we're going through.
Yeah. I love support groups. I think they're such a great way to meet other people and to push yourself outside of your comfort zone. And I also think it's a really great way to kind of learn how to advocate for yourself too, because in those situations, it might be expected that they ask you some questions or they want you to share a few things about yourself. And so I think it really does kind of push you to be outside your comfort zone, but it's a really great thing to learn and grow and to make really great relationships from.
Yeah, absolutely. And then Laura asked, I'm stuck in the intake process with a counselor who seems annoyed that I'm nervous. Am I supposed to be able to make an OCD counselor comfortable before I can get help?
That sounds really hard. I think I don't know, I think it also comes down to your values and you and what your personal opinion is on the situation. But you can always reach out to other therapists too if you find that maybe something's not working. I think that's something I got really stuck on at the beginning of therapy, that I was like, okay, this is my therapist and I need to stick with them. And then I was like, things actually aren't really working out very well. I don't feel like a really great, strong relationship. I don't feel like we started off on the right foot. And so I kind of looked around for other therapists. And I think that's totally normal to just, because you're not going to fit with everyone, right? And especially when you're sharing such personal details, right? OCD is very personal. So sometimes when you're sharing that, you want to make sure that you feel a good connection and just comfortable with that person.
Yeah. I mean, it's just like any other relationship. You want to feel comfortable with them. Yes, you need to be uncomfortable, because that is the goal, kind of, is to accept those uncomfortable feelings, that anxiety. But you still at the same time need to be, like you said, open. Being able to be open with them is going to be really necessary, I think, in ERP therapy. So shop around. It's not therapists know not to take it personally. If you are like, this is not a good fit, I need to see somebody who can be this type of person, they're not going to get mad at you. Their goal is to help you. So if they are not providing that help, they will help you find somebody else even.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Sometimes even just asking them hey, this isn't working. Is there someone else that you recommend, or have a list of people that are specialized in ERP that could help me?
Yeah.
They can provide that. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And again, having, can you recommend how to say, can you recommend how to say, I feel like I'm failing with them?
I would just be honest and just kind of tell them how you're feeling about it. And just like Mollie said, therapists are there. They know that not everyone's a good fit with them, and that if you just kind of tell them how things are going and that you just don't think it's a good fit, they should be able to support you with transitioning.
Yeah. And it might be helpful to have, if there's certain personality traits that you think will work better, you can kind of say, I need somebody who can provide this, or I need somebody who, whatever the trait is that you're looking for. If you don't know that, that's okay too. And just say like, I don't think this is a good fit. And that's, that is kind of part of their job, is to hear that sometimes. Not, again, it's just like any other relationship. Not everybody's going to match and be, perfect together.
Yeah. And it can be a really hard and uncomfortable conversation, but it's better in the long run. Because even like if you stick around with a therapist that just isn't working the best with you, are you really like, you might not see the best results, right?
Yeah. And I think that's true as well. If they're annoyed at you, or if they're like, if they're, I don't know, if anything from them is kind of being, I can't think of the word, like pushed onto you, that's probably not a good sign, I think.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Yes, someone said you need a compassionate therapist. I think that's yes, totally. I say compassionate, but also, and just someone who's there, who wants to push you and wants to see the best of you. Yeah.
Absolutely. And then, so Kate asked, in POCD, it's common to masturbate as a compulsion to prove they aren't attracted to their thoughts. Is that possible for harm OCD to make sure they aren't attracted to the thought of hurting someone? So first of all, again, for anyone who is unfamiliar, POCD is pedophilia OCD. It is not anything the same as being a pedophile. It is, again, just OCD that latches onto that idea of being a pedophile. So, and like they said, it's, masturbating as a compulsion is common with that type of OCD.
Yeah, and especially like trying to prove to yourself and to your thoughts that you are the opposite. I think that's a huge thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And again, like we were saying before, I don't even remember what it was that quickly, but we were saying if you're trying to prove something to yourself, that's a pretty big flag that it is part of a compulsion. So, in terms of again, anything that you're trying to prove, if you are to make sure, if you're trying to, verify, yes, is kind of always going to be the answer, that can be a compulsion.
And it's definitely hard to accept that you need to stop trying to prove to yourself, right? That you need to stop trying to prove that you are or aren't a pedophile, or that you may or may not harm someone. It's a really difficult thing to accept and to kind of to go with, but in the long run, it's the best, because then you just kind of build up those skills and your strength, and you know how to better deal with OCD. But it is really hard when it comes to those themes like pedophilia OCD and harm OCD, because they are so stigmatized. So you do want to try your absolute hardest to not become that person, or to not have those thoughts, or not to be seen as either of them. So I send my heart to you, because I definitely deal with that a lot. Like I deal with POCD and harm OCD a lot, and it's really hard to just kind of sit and accept those thoughts, and that maybe I am, maybe I'm not. I'll never really know.
Yeah. And I appreciate, Kate, that you asked that, because I know it's so hard to talk about these things, and it's unfortunate, because it is, again, just a part of OCD. It has no value as to who you are as a person, what you care about, what you value. So I'm always glad when people do bring up those things that are, we don't necessarily touch on unless somebody asks them in a question. And I love that, that we can be here and support people that are going through that.
Totally. And then also just remembering that, like, we don't have control, not to give reassurance, but we don't have control over our thoughts, right? So anyone can deal with any of these different themes and these thoughts. And just because you have them, like, you can't control it, right? So which is really, really difficult too.
And I know a lot of times people will compare their experiences to others, which it's impossible not to. But it is, again, it's just another thing your OCD is latching onto. So it's, it's so easy to be like, well, I wish I had that theme, because that seems so much more, more simple to deal with. And that's why you don't, is because it's not something you necessarily value or care about as much. And so your OCD is like, no, that's not something that's going to bother me. Which is, that's exactly why it's not. So,
yeah.
I don't see any other questions for right now, and I know it is almost time. 9 o'clock here, 7 o'clock there.
Yes.
So I love all of these questions. I'm just so happy to get to do this. Like, I feel like we're just hanging out and we get to just talk about these things that we talk about all day anyway. But
yeah, and I just love that. So there's so many familiar faces and names that show up
Mhm.
to these every week, which I think is amazing that people are utilizing lives as a resource. And I think
Mhm.
it's such a great way to connect with other people in the community and to get some questions and like to kind of seek some clarity on things, which yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah, thank you, Darla, for being here. I love too that I don't know if I guess this one is through YouTube, that it shows people's pictures,
Yeah.
which is brave of people that they are that they are here, that they're asking these questions, that they are curious and trying to learn and trying to better themselves. And it helps me. I know I don't want to speak for you, but I know just talking about this every time we do, it makes it a little bit easier. So
Absolutely. 100%. Yeah. The more I talk about it, the easier it can get.
and the more hopefully it helps other people as well.
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right. Well, I am going to hit end. But thank you all for being here. Thank you, Anna, for joining me. So fun. And we will see you guys all next Thursday.
Well, see you everyone.
Bye.
Bye.